Carlton Green's morning had started out just like any other, with a hollow ache in his chest and the faint hope that something, anything, might change his fortunes that day. He was trudging through his fields of drought-ravaged corn when something extraordinary happened, something that would later reshape everything he believed about generosity, hard work, and the quiet power of a simple act of deacon. Kindness. He had no idea that this twist of fate was already in motion, that in a matter of months, a miracle in the form of gleaming metal would appear on his property, renewing not only his land, but his faith in the goodness of people. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit the subscribe button for something special tomorrow. Carlton had been up since dawn, wrestling with an aging irrigation system that groaned and sputtered under the relentless summer heat. The farm was large, spanning nearly 200 acres of mostly corn and a few scattered patches of soybeans, but the yield had been steadily diminishing for years. Drought conditions compounded the difficulty, and the rising cost of seed and fertilizer only added to his burdens. Bills were piling up in a disorganized stack on the small wooden table in his living room, each stamped with past due notices that made his stomach churn. He had inherited the farm from his father, a proud man who had kept the land prosperous through changing times, but now it felt like the entire weight of that legacy pressed on Carlton's back as the farmland slowly withered under a merciless sky. He walked between the corn rows, leaves crackling underfoot. The plants stood shorter and drier than they should have been at this stage in the season. Sweat glistened on his brow as he examined the drooping stalks. Anxious thoughts plagued him. How many weeks before the bank would issue another foreclosure notice? Was there any chance of a decent harvest this year, or would he be forced to sell off parts of the farm he had once promised his father he would protect? Each question was like a knife in his gut, a reminder that time was running out. The morning light, still mild, gave him a sliver of solace before the sun rose higher and scorched the fields with brutal intensity. He tried to start his battered tractor, a relic from the 1970, but the engine protested loudly, coughing out black smoke. Determined not to let despair defeat him, he lifted the hood and fiddled with a tangle of hoses and cables, hoping he could coax a bit more life out of the old machine. His attempts were in vain. After several minutes, the tractor sputtered and died. He slammed his fist against the metal, frustration flaring in his chest. Nothing in his life, from the fields to the equipment, seemed to be working in his favor. Then he heard it, a faint, uneven hum of an engine coming from the main road. The property was isolated, and he rarely had unexpected visitors. He wiped sweat from his forehead and straightened, gazing toward the dirt path that cut through the edge of his land. Dust billowed behind a small sedan that inched forward, engine rattling as if it might give out at any moment. Curious and vaguely concerned, he moved closer, noticing how the car wobbled like someone was fighting to keep control. Finally, the vehicle shuddered to a halt at the side of his field, steam curling from beneath the hood. A tall man in business attire stepped out, looking thoroughly out of place in a crisp white shirt and black slacks, neither of which were suited for farmland in the middle of a scorching summer. The man fiddled with his phone, tapping at the screen with increasing frustration, likely finding no service in the remote countryside. Carlton approached, feeling a swirl of unease and curiosity. Strangers were rare out here, and he couldn't help but wonder if this was a bank official come to serve him foreclosure papers, or if the man was simply lost. "Excuse me," the stranger called out, shielding his eyes from the sun. "I hate to bother you, but my car started smoking, and I don't have a signal to call for help. Do you know if there's a mechanic nearby?" Carlton sized the man up, noticing that he seemed more overheated than threatening. He also looked exhausted, perhaps from a long drive, or from desperately trying to nurse the car along dusty roads. Without hesitating, Carlton wiped his greasy hands on his jeans and responded, "Mechanic is about 15 miles down the main road, but you won't reach him if your car's dead. There's no real service around here, unless you climb one of those hills." He paused, clearing his throat. "I can try to take a look, but if it's something serious, you might have to wait for a tow truck, and that might take a while." The stranger exhaled slowly, relief blending with disappointment. "Thank you. I appreciate any help you can offer. My name's Greg, by the way." Carlton nodded. "I'm Carlton. Let's pop the hood and see what we're dealing with. They moved to the front of the car, careful to avoid the plume of hot steam that hissed upward when Greg lifted the hood. The smell of bird coolant hit them, and Carlton grimaced. Could be a radiator leak or a busted hose. Hard to fix out here. We can let it cool down, add some water, see if that helps. I have a well over by the barn if you need to refill. Greg rubbed the back of his neck. Thank you, Carlton. I'm not the best with cars, so any guidance is more than I could hope for right now. Carlton wasn't entirely sure about the man's situation, but he knew exactly what it felt like to be desperate for help. He squinted at the sun climbing higher, feeling a trickle of sweat run down the back of his neck. After a moment's hesitation, he said, "If it won't start, you might need to wait till evening to call a tow truck. No sense standing out here in the heat. Why don't you come back to the farm? I can offer you some shade, water, maybe a bite to eat. Staying in this sun can't be good for you." Surprise flickered across Greg's face, followed by visible gratitude. "That's incredibly kind. Are you sure I'm not imposing?" Carlton waved off the concern. "Don't worry about it. I could use some company today anyway." Then, attempting a small grin, he added, "Just watch your step. The place isn't exactly in pristine shape." They walked back toward the farmhouse, crossing rows of dry corn that rustled in the breeze. Carlton noticed that Greg's shoes, polished and neat, were completely unsuited for the uneven ground. The man stumbled a few times, regaining balance with a wry half-smile. The dryness in the air intensified as they neared the center of the property, an unsettling sign of how far the drought had advanced. Carlton felt a pang of shame about the state of his fields, but there was nothing he could do except pray for rain. At the farmhouse, a modest wooden structure with peeling paint, Carlton led Greg into the kitchen. The interior was humble, bearing the wear of many years, but it was tidy enough. Carlton filled a glass with cool water from the tap, grateful that his well hadn't run dry yet, and handed it to Greg. The stranger drank eagerly, wiping his mouth on his sleeve when he was done. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. "You have no idea how much this helps." Carlton nodded, rummaging through the pantry to see if he could throw together a simple lunch. He found a loaf of bread, some fresh tomatoes from the small garden he maintained behind the house, and a bit of cheese that was nearing its expiration date. While assembling the sandwiches, he felt curious about Greg's life, but chose not to pry. Instead, he made a bit of small talk. "So, you traveling on business, or just passing through?" Greg shifted in his seat. "A bit of both, you might say," he replied, shrugging lightly. "I'm from out of state, just driving through this region for a meeting with some folks who are interested in advanced agricultural solutions, some technology demonstration. Truth be told, I'm not used to country roads." Carlton snorted a quiet laugh. "I can tell. Those shoes have city sidewalks written all over them. Well, you picked a heck of a day to break down, I'll say that. The forecast is calling for high temperatures, so at least you won't be standing outside in the rain." He placed the sandwiches on the table, gesturing for Greg to help himself. "Sorry it's nothing fancy, but it'll keep you going." Greg took a bite, nodding in approval. "I've had worse, believe me. This is perfectly fine. Actually, it's better than fine right now." There was a moment of silence as they both ate. Carlton studied the man more closely. Greg's clothes, though dusty from the roadside, were clearly expensive. His watch glinted on his wrist, looking equally costly. Yet there was a weariness in his posture, a tension around his eyes that hinted at stress beyond just car trouble. When Greg caught him looking, he merely gave a polite smile. After lunch, they agreed to see if they could at least get some water into the car's radiator. The day was scorching as they carried a bucket of water out to the broken-down vehicle. Heat rippled across the horizon, distorting the line of the fields. Carlton carefully poured water into the radiator, but it was clear the system had sustained damage. Greg tried starting the car, only to have it groan, cough, and die again. With a frustrated sigh, he turned the key off and stepped out. "Looks like I'm stuck," he said softly, gazing at the endless expanse of farmland as if it were a foreign planet. "You're welcome to stay the night in my barn if you can't get a tow truck until tomorrow," Carlton offered, though the invitation surprised even himself. He was usually cautious about strangers, but something about Greg's situation, and perhaps the bleakness of his own mood made him want to help. "There's plenty of room, and at least it'll keep you from sleeping in your car. There's a payphone down in the town, about 8 miles east, but getting there might be an issue unless we get a ride." Greg looked grateful, if a bit hesitant. "I don't want to be any trouble," he repeated, scanning Carlton's expression. "But if you're sure, I might take you up on that offer. I don't think I can push this car all the way into town." Carlton nodded. "You're not trouble. Everyone needs a hand now and then." A flicker of sadness passed over his face as he thought about his own struggles. "Believe me, I get that. Let's get you set up in the barn. Make sure you have blankets and such. Then we'll try the phone tomorrow. Maybe I can ask my neighbor for a lift." They made their way to the old barn, a place that had seen better days but still held sturdy beams and enough space for various tools, hay bales, and the battered remains of equipment. Carlton cleared a spot for Greg, laying out a couple of clean blankets on a soft patch of hay. It wasn't five-star accommodation, but it was far more comfortable than sleeping in a car. Greg looked around, noticing the well-worn tractor parked near the far wall. Even in the dim light, it was evident that the machine was near the end of its life. The paint was chipped, and its tires had cracks in the rubber. "Do you get much use out of that anymore?" Greg asked, tilting his head toward the old tractor. Carlton gave a short laugh. "Not if I can help it. It breaks down every time I take it out for more than a couple of hours. Lately, I've been doing most things by hand or hiring a neighbor's tractor when I absolutely need it. But I can't afford a new one, so I make do with what I have." He shrugged, trying not to dwell on the frustration that roiled in his gut every time he thought about that piece of junk. Greg ran his hand along one of the barn's dusty beams. "Still, there's something about a place like this. It might be old, but it has a story, right?" Carlton looked around, remembering how his father had once used the barn as the lifeblood of the farm, storing hay and tools, even raising a few animals in pens that now lay empty. "Yeah, there's a story here," he murmured, just not sure how it ends. They talked a bit more as the day wore on, mostly idle conversation about where Greg had grown up. He mentioned a city several states away and how Carlton came into possession of the farm. He explained it was a family inheritance. Neither man pried too deeply into the other's hardships, but a quiet understanding began to form. Sometimes you see another person who's struggling, and, without words, you recognize a kindred spirit. By nightfall, the temperature finally relented, allowing a cooler breeze to slip through the barn's cracks. Carlton brought Greg a lantern, a flask of water, and some leftover sandwiches to tide him over until morning. Greg thanked him more times than seemed necessary, but Carlton just nodded. "Get some rest," he said simply. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Carlton then returned to the farmhouse, flicking on a single lamp in the living room. On the small wooden table, the stack of unpaid bills was a silent witness to his predicament. Exhausted, he sank into a weathered armchair, rubbing his temples. He couldn't help but think how easily Greg's misfortune could have been his own. Stranded, desperate, reliant on a stranger's kindness. He kept a small sense of perspective that at least he had a roof over his head, no matter how shaky his finances were. He didn't sleep much that night, tossing and turning as the humid air pressed down on him. Images of withered cornfields flickered in his mind, along with the worried faces of the bank officers who had visited weeks ago, reminding him that time was short. He wondered if it was foolish to help someone else, when he could barely help himself. But the more he thought about it, the more he recognized that offering shelter had cost him almost nothing. And in a harsh world, small acts of compassion could be the only currency that really mattered. When dawn arrived, he trudged out to the barn, half expecting to find Greg gone. To his surprise, Greg was awake, carefully folding the blankets. "Morning," he said, stretching his arms. "Hope you got some sleep. I kept hearing odd creaks all night, but I guess that's part of the charm." Carlton chuckled. "That's the barn for you. Let's see if we can call for a tow truck today. My neighbor, Ms. Wilcox, might be able to give you a ride into town so you can figure out the details." They had a quick breakfast of scrambled eggs and whatever bread was left. Then they walked to Ms. Wilcox's property, a modest homestead about a mile down a connecting dirt road. The older woman, known for her blunt manner and generous spirit, gave Carlton a skeptical look when he introduced Greg, but eventually warmed to the idea of helping. "Sure," she said, smoothing her apron. "I was heading to the feed store anyway. If your friend here wants to hop in the truck, I can drop him by the payphone in town, or maybe even the mechanic's place." Greg seemed relieved. "That would be fantastic. Thank you so much." He turned to Carlton, offering a handshake. "I can't repay your kindness right now, but I hope you know how grateful I am. Once I sort this out, I'll see if I can swing back and cover whatever I owe you for meals and a place to stay." Carlton waved it off. "Don't worry about it. Safe travels, Greg." Ms. Wilcox hoisted herself into her old pickup. Greg climbed in beside her, and they rolled away in a cloud of dust. Carlton stood there watching, a strange sense of emptiness blossoming in his chest, as though he'd just said goodbye to a distant relative he might never see again. He walked back to his own property, returning to the unending list of chores. The memory of Greg's dusty shoes and thankful smile stuck with him throughout the day, weaving itself into his thoughts as he battled with the irrigation pump, fed the chickens, and wrestled with the battered tractor's engine in the feeble hope of coaxing it back to life. Over the next few weeks, life carried on with its grinding routine. The drought worsened, leaving the fields in an even sorrier state. Carlton's concerns grew heavier as he struggled to keep the bank's demands at bay, often ignoring calls he knew would lead to confrontations about overdue payments. He tried to remind himself that he was doing everything within his power, but each day felt like another step toward an inevitable downfall. He barely had time to think about Greg, although sometimes he found himself wondering if the man had managed to fix the car, or if he had made it to his business meeting. He certainly never expected to see or hear from Greg again. Seasons changed slowly in that part of the countryside. Eventually, after many scorching days, the skies opened up with a welcome rainfall. It wasn't enough to fully revive the fields, but it offered temporary relief from the unrelenting dryness. Carlton found small hope in the patter of rain on the roof, but as the weeks passed, the old anxieties returned. The weather alone couldn't fix his financial troubles. The harvest was stunted, yields were low, and the amount he made at market barely covered his basic costs. The battered tractor broke down again, forcing him to rent Ms. Wilcox's machinery a few times, incurring extra expenses that gnawed away at his savings. One cold morning, just as the early frost was starting to creep across the fields, a notice arrived, pinned to his mailbox by the bank representative. Carlton felt a hollow dread when he read it, realizing that he was dangerously close to losing the entire farm if he didn't manage to pay a significant portion of his debt soon. Panicked, he spent days calling around, hoping for a loan or some form of leniency. Nothing materialized. The best he could manage was a small extension from one of the bank's clerks, but even that was only a temporary reprieve. Disheartened, he took to wandering the fields aimlessly, watching the sky for signs of a miracle that never seemed to come. Nights were worse, filled with anxious tossing and turning, as the fear of foreclosure loomed like a specter over his bed. More than once, he awoke in a cold sweat, the taste of despair on his tongue. Yet each morning, he forced himself to keep going, to feed the animals, to check the meager crops, to pretend there was still a chance to turn things around. Months slipped by, and the memory of Greg faded into the background, a small footnote in the chronicle of near-constant worry that consumed Carlton's life. Though he often prided himself on being resilient, he couldn't deny that the weight was crushing him. He was behind on bills, behind on equipment maintenance, behind on mortgage payments. He caught himself staring at the barn sometimes, thinking about simpler times when the building was bustling with activity, remembering how Greg had slept there for a single night and left with gratitude shining in his eyes. The barn now stood as a silent witness to a decline that seemed almost inevitable. Then, in the early days of winter, something happened that stunned Carlton so completely, he wondered if he was in the midst of a dream. He woke up before dawn, as he always did, pulled on a heavy coat, and stepped out onto the front porch. The cold air bit into his cheeks. He took a moment to peer across the dimly lit farmyard, where the horizon still had only a faint glow hinting at daybreak. Usually he would turn toward the barn, or head to the chicken coop first, but a gleam in the middle of his field caught his eye. Confused, he squinted, trying to identify the shape. Parked near the very spot where his old tractor would sometimes sit, something large and shiny reflected the weak dawn light. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and started walking toward it, the crunch of frost under his boots sounding impossibly loud. As he approached, his breath caught in his throat. It was a tractor, but not just any tractor. It was brand new, sleek, painted a vivid green with the sort of polished sheen that promised state-of-the-art engineering. The tires looked enormous, sturdy enough to tackle any terrain. There were no plates or stickers indicating ownership, but it stood there silently, as though it had grown overnight from the soil itself. His mind reeled. He couldn't fathom who might have driven it there, or why. He walked around it slowly, heart hammering, gaze sweeping over the modern design, the advanced controls visible through the glass cabin. On the seat lay a small envelope, pinned down by the tractor's ignition key. With trembling fingers, Carlton picked up the note and read, "For the man who helped me when he had nothing to spare. Thank you. May this keep your farm alive, Greg." Carlton felt a rush of memory, recalling that scorching day months ago. The broken-down sedan, the man who wore polished shoes in the dust. Greg, the stranger who had seemed so out of place in the country, who had stayed one night in the barn, who had politely disappeared with Ms. Wilcox. Shock mingled with an overwhelming tide of gratitude. He reread the note several times, disbelieving that the sleek, brand-new tractor before him was truly meant for him, a gift to save his struggling farm. Stunned tears prickled at his eyes. How could this be real? He gently touched the tractor's metal body, half expecting it to vanish under his fingertips. The machine was solid, built by a renowned agricultural tech firm, if the small logo on the side was any indication. He looked around, searching for any sign of who might have delivered it. The frosty ground bore tire tracks that vanished into the distance, as if whoever dropped it off had quietly driven away in the night. No one was in sight, only the silent fields. Filled with an indescribable mixture of awe and hope, he climbed up into the seat, turning the key. The engine roared smoothly, powerful, yet refined. All at once, he felt like the weight of his hardships had lifted, at least for the moment. The thought that someone cared enough to do this for him threatened to unravel his stoic composure. He spent the next hour just marveling at the tractor, testing the controls in slow circles around the field. Everything worked flawlessly. The advanced dashboard displayed digital readings he had only read about in magazines, things like GPS-based steering, real-time traction analysis, and fluid-level monitors. It was exactly the upgrade he had so desperately needed, the sort of advanced equipment that could quadruple his efficiency and cut down operational costs. With a brand new tractor, he would no longer have to rely on renting or borrowing from neighbors, nor would he waste time struggling with constant breakdowns. This might be the lifeline that turned everything around. As the sun rose higher, Ms. Wilcox noticed the gleaming machine from her own property and came over, curiosity burning in her eyes. When Carlton recounted the story of Greg, the broken-down car, and now this astonishing gift, her jaw practically dropped to the ground. Others in the small community soon got wind of the incredible event. Farmers from a few miles away stopped by, drawn to the rumors of a brand-new tractor appearing overnight. Many expressed a mixture of disbelief and admiration for whoever Greg was. Some teased Carlton, joking that he must have a wealthy guardian angel. Others simply congratulated him, well aware of how dire his situation had become. But, as the shock subsided, Carlton realized the tractor alone, while miraculous, was not an absolute fix for his financial predicament. He still owed the bank a painful sum. However, having reliable equipment now meant he could expedite fieldwork, expand his future planting, and potentially secure better harvests. That advantage was huge. If he planned carefully, it might be the saving grace for the farm. Determined to make the most of the gift, he set to work immediately, using the tractor to till and prepare what land remained workable before the true grip of winter set in. Each day, he carefully studied the machine's manual, learning every function and capability. Its advanced features included an integrated planting guidance system, ensuring seeds were spaced perfectly. The tractor's fuel efficiency, combined with reduced downtime, would save him money in the long run. He wrote a letter addressed to Greg at the only lead he had, the same address Greg had casually mentioned for a technology demonstration in the region, though it was vague. He had no idea if it would reach the man, but he poured his gratitude onto paper, explaining how life-changing the gift was. Whether Greg ever received it or not, writing it felt cathartic, reminding him just how far a small act of kindness could travel. Winter fully arrived, bringing biting winds and a scattering of snow. Under normal circumstances, this season was a difficult period for the farm, a time when meager funds often shrank even further and anxieties about the coming planting season loomed. But now, he had reason to plan, to strategize. He spent long evenings at the kitchen table, going over budgets, potential yield estimates, and the advanced methods he could implement with the new tractor. He even called a few local agricultural suppliers, renegotiating seed contracts by using the promise of higher productivity. Some, intrigued by his new equipment, offered him better terms, hoping to secure a piece of the success story that might be on the horizon. As the cold months inched by, word spread further about the mysterious gift. A local reporter came by to interview Carlton after hearing rumors of a miracle tractor left anonymously in the night. He was hesitant to attract too much attention, but saw some potential benefit in publicity if it could help him secure business or partnerships. The story ran in a small-town paper, mentioning that a random act of generosity had revived one farmer's hopes. Neighbors read it and shook their heads in astonishment. Yet no one seemed to know who Greg was or how to contact him directly. When the snow finally melted and the early hints of spring arrived, Carlton was ready. He used the tractor's advanced guidance system to plant corn more efficiently than ever before, carefully spacing seeds and ensuring fertilizer was applied at optimal intervals. The sense of excitement he felt was like a dormant seed inside him that had finally sprouted. Every morning, he woke up energized, eager to see how the newly planted rows were doing. He even found the confidence to negotiate with the bank again, presenting them with projections that showed, if the harvest went well, he could catch up on overdue payments. Although the bank representatives were cautious, they gave him a slightly extended timeline, seeing that he had taken a significant step toward modernizing his farm. It was during this time that he finally received a letter. The envelope was neatly addressed to him, no return address except a corporate name he recognized from an article about agricultural technology. Inside was a short note, penned in a neat hand. "Carlton, I received your letter. It's wonderful to hear that the tractor is already helping you. Sorry I dropped it off and vanished, but I had to catch a flight overseas. I'm proud of you for persevering, and I hope this equipment is the key to a better tomorrow. Keep up the good work, Greg." Carlton's eyes misted over as he reread Greg's words. So Greg had received his letter after all. The note was short but sincere, and it only deepened the sense of awe swirling inside Carlton. In the same envelope was a business card with Greg's name printed on it. Below his name was a title, Chief Executive Officer of an agricultural tech firm, one that specialized in advanced machinery and software for farming efficiency. Carlton's eyebrows shot up as he realized that the man he had once helped in his dusty barn was not just well off, but possibly quite influential in the global agricultural market. Shaking his head, Carlton marveled at the fact that Greg had said little about his background that fateful day, never revealing the scope of his resources or status. Buoyed by a renewed sense of possibility, Carlton approached the upcoming planting season with more optimism than he had felt in years. The fields responded well to the improved methods. Emerging seedlings stood straighter, greener, and more uniform than any he had seen in a long time. He carefully monitored their progress, sometimes climbing up into the tractor's cab just to check the digital readouts. Whenever he felt overwhelmed, he remembered that gratitude was the bedrock of his new life. After all, Greg had trusted him with this machinery, giving him a fighting chance to save the farm. It was an act of faith in his character. One day, as he was out inspecting rows of tender young corn, a black SUV pulled up to the farmhouse. Carlton noticed it from a distance its sleek frame contrasting sharply with the rustic backdrop. A well-dressed woman stepped out, scanning the property as if comparing it to some reference in her mind. Curious, he walked toward her, hands slightly dirty from the soil. "Hello there," he greeted. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled warmly. "You must be Carlton. My name is Jody. I work for Greg, assisting with various outreach programs and client partnerships. He sent me here to see how you're doing, to check on the tractor's performance, and discuss a few opportunities if you're open to them." Carlton blinked, adjusting to the idea that Greg had an entire team that might show interest in his modest operation. He wiped his hands on his jeans, feeling a flicker of nerves. "That's kind of you." "Sure, I'm open to talking. Would you like to step inside or take a look around?" Jody nodded. "Let's start with a quick walk, if that's okay. I'd love to see the crops, especially how you're implementing the tractor's advanced features." They strolled among the emerging plants, discussing seed varieties, fertilizer schedules, and the intricacies of controlling pests and weeds. Carlton explained how the tractor's sensors and GPS guidance had elevated his efficiency, drastically reducing wasted seed. He spoke about how excited he was to see if the yield matched or exceeded his estimates. Jody took notes, occasionally asking more technical questions. Her manner was polite yet direct, showing genuine interest in the success of the farm. Eventually, they circled back to the farmhouse, where Carlton offered a glass of iced tea, feeling a mix of pride and lingering disbelief that corporate representatives would find his humble place so compelling. Jody took a seat on the creaky porch, gazing out at the land. "Greg was impressed by how quickly you adapted to this technology," she began. "He's always believed that the best stories come from everyday farmers who just need the right tools and a bit of help. He wants to propose something, and I'm here to feel you out about it." Curiosity sparked in Carlton. "What's on his mind?" She cleared her throat gently. "Our company is launching an initiative to demonstrate modern farming techniques to smaller operations that might be struggling. We'd like to host a field day here at your farm, inviting local farmers to see the equipment in action. You'd get some publicity, some support from our team, and hopefully the chance to form new partnerships. We call it a demonstration pilot. Greg believes MCK. Sorry. I mean, your farm could be a perfect example of how technology can transform outcomes." Carlton hesitated, the idea both exciting and intimidating. He pictured crowds of curious farmers wandering his fields, cameras capturing his half-repaired barn and peeling farmhouse. But he also recognized this could be a rare chance to secure additional revenue streams or even sponsorship from the company. "It sounds like a big undertaking," he said carefully. "I'm not opposed, but I'd need to understand the details." Jody smiled. "Of course. There's no pressure. I can leave you with some literature about how these events typically run. All we'd need from you is access to the fields, your personal testimony about your experience, and maybe a short demonstration of how you use the tractor. We bring staff, set up booths, and invite local media. Typically, we see a good turnout. Farmers ask questions, watch the equipment in action, and sometimes end up purchasing or leasing through our program." He sipped his iced tea, weighing the possibilities. "All right, I'll look it over. I appreciate the opportunity. I guess if it helps other folks as much as it's helped me, it can't be a bad thing. I'll tell Greg you're considering it," she replied, standing up. "In the meantime, keep up the good work. He's rooting for you from afar, and I'm sure he'll drop by himself if he's ever in town." With that, she departed, leaving Carlton with a folder of documents outlining the demonstration pilot. He leafed through them that evening, amazed at how thoroughly the program was structured, from marketing strategies to educational workshops. The thought of hosting such an event on his land felt surreal, but he couldn't deny the sense of pride it stirred. Only a year ago, he had been on the brink of losing everything. Now, he was fielding visits from a major agricultural tech firm, sharing lessons on how to use advanced equipment he could never have afforded on his own. Spring transitioned into the warmth of summer. The corn grew tall and strong, the leaves rustling with renewed life. Carlton's days were a whirlwind of activity as he managed every aspect of the farm, from irrigation to scouting for pests. The brand-new tractor never faltered, humming along reliably whenever he fired it up. His optimism soared each time he surveyed the lush growth, envisioning a harvest large enough to settle his debts and keep the farm in the family. And in quieter moments, he still marveled at the generosity that had arrived one morning, inexplicably changing his world. Eventually, he agreed to host the demonstration pilot. Over the next month, Jody and a small team from the tech company helped him plan everything, from setting up demonstration plots to inviting local farmers and media. Carlton threw himself into preparations, even sprucing up the barn with a fresh coat of paint and repairing a few rotted boards. Ms. Wilcox stopped by often, curious about the developments. She teased him about becoming a local celebrity, a notion that made him blush. At last, the big day arrived. Rows of cars and trucks lined the edges of his fields as small groups of farmers, agronomists, and journalists wandered around, guided by the company's staff. Tents were set up to provide shade, each containing displays of different technological solutions for small farms. Carlton led scheduled tours, proudly showing how he used the tractor's advanced mapping features to optimize planting density. Attendees marveled at the digital interface, snapping photos and asking technical questions. Some expressed skepticism, but many seemed genuinely inspired by how quickly the farm had rebounded. He noticed Jody talking to a cluster of reporters, gesturing toward him and the brand-new tractor, likely retelling the story of how it was delivered in the dead of night. One reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Mr. Green, how do you feel about having your farm serve as an example to others who might be struggling?" the reporter asked. Carlton wiped the sweat from his forehead, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. "It's an honor, really," he said. "I was on the edge of losing everything. And to see how this technology changed my circumstances is a blessing. I want other farmers to understand that there are new methods and tools out there, and if they keep an open mind, they can pull through hard times." The reporter smiled, clearly pleased with his answer. "And any idea who Greg is? The man who gifted you this tractor? There's a lot of talk around here about him." Carlton shrugged. "He's my friend, I guess you could say. At least, I consider him one after what he did for me. He's the CEO of this tech company, but more than that, he's someone who believes farmers deserve better support. I just wish I could thank him face to face again." The day was a triumph. By the time the last demonstration ended, many local farmers had expressed interest in leasing or purchasing equipment. Some wanted to sign up for consultation services, while others simply left with new ideas. The company staff seemed thrilled, hinting that future collaborations could be in store for Carlton if he wanted. Exhausted but satisfied, he shook countless hands, hearing story after story of others who were barely holding on. He encouraged them, sharing how a single act of kindness had given him hope. Night fell, and soon the crowd dispersed, leaving behind only the soft glow of the barn's overhead light and the humming of crickets. Carlton sat on his porch, sipping a cool drink, replaying the day's events in his head. In the distance, the brand-new tractor gleamed faintly under the moonlight, a symbol of how drastically life had changed. He was lost in thought when he heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Looking up, he saw a sleek car rolling to a stop, headlights momentarily illuminating the porch steps. The engine turned off, and a figure stepped out. With the dim light from the porch, Carlton recognized the silhouette. Greg. Heart leaping, Carlton stood, almost knocking over his glass in his haste. Greg walked closer, wearing a slightly sheepish smile. "Carlton," he greeted, voice low and warm. "Looks like I arrived a bit late for the big show." Speechless, Carlton took a moment to regain composure. "Greg, wow. Thank you for coming. I didn't actually know if I'd ever see you again." Greg nodded, taking in the scene. "I got tied up in meetings, but I flew in this afternoon and drove straight here once I could. I wanted to see for myself what you've accomplished." He gestured at the farm, the tidy rows of corn, the newly painted barn. "It's incredible, Carlton. It's exactly what I hoped would happen when I dropped off that tractor." Emotion welled up in Carlton's chest. "You saved this farm, Greg. I can't begin to thank you enough. If I have to spend the rest of my life trying, I will." A hint of discomfort showed in Greg's expression, as though praise made him uneasy. "Believe it or not, You did most of the work. I just gave you the tool. And I did it because you were there for me when my car broke down. You showed me kindness when you had every reason to focus on your own troubles. That's not something I come across every day. Carlton remembered the sweaty, desperate day Greg had appeared. He recalled offering water, a meal, a place to rest in the barn. It had felt so natural, even amid his own crisis. He exhaled a shaky breath. Well, you turned that small act into a massive opportunity for me. You have no idea how grateful I am. Greg looked around, noting the scattered footprints where demonstration attendees had walked. I see you hosted the pilot. Jody told me it was a success. That means more farmers might get the help they need. That's our mission. But we can't do it without guys like you who've lived the struggle. They moved onto the porch. Carlton offered Greg the chair beside him, and for a moment, the two men sat in companionable silence, listening to the crickets and feeling the night air's coolness. Eventually, Greg cleared his throat. So, where do you go from here? You had a good planting season, from the looks of it. Carlton nodded. If the harvest meets expectations, I can clear a huge chunk of my debt. Might even be able to invest in additional improvements, maybe upgrade the irrigation system. After that, who knows? Maybe expand the orchard. Hire one or two more people, so I'm not working around the clock. Greg smiled softly. It's good to hear, and if you want to continue working with us, we're open to exploring more advanced solutions. You've shown an aptitude for the technology that many farmers struggle with. We could incorporate your feedback into our designs. Maybe do more demonstrations next season. It's entirely up to you. Carlton leaned back, letting the possibilities swirl in his mind. Only months ago, he would have scoffed at the idea of collaborating with a major corporation. Now, it felt like a path to ensure stability, not just for himself but for the whole community. The heaviness that once crushed him was gone, replaced by cautious optimism. I'm definitely interested, he said at last. I can't believe how life can change so drastically just because someone took a leap of faith on me. Greg's gaze wandered to the moonlit fields. I was taught that if you're in a position to help, you do it. And I was in a position where I could, thanks to some good fortune in my own life. I was lucky you welcomed me in when I was just a stranger on the side of the road. They spent the next hour swapping personal stories. Greg explained a bit about his upbringing, how he had come from humble beginnings and found success in the tech world through perseverance and a few breaks of his own. He recounted the day of the breakdown, admitting that he was on his way to finalize a significant deal and, in the midst of it, felt thoroughly humbled by needing help in such a remote place. Carlton listened, surprised at how the wealthy CEO had once been an ordinary kid, tinkering with farm equipment in his family's small garage. That hidden layer of shared experience made their bond feel more genuine. Eventually, fatigue settled in. Greg stood, smoothing the wrinkles from his suit. I better head to the nearest motel and get some rest. I'm flying out again tomorrow. Meetings never stop. He extended his hand to Carlton. Thank you for the warm welcome. And thank you for letting my team host today's event. Carlton gripped Greg's hand tightly, gratitude radiating from his expression. No thank you. This farm has a future because of you. Don't be a stranger, all right? Greg nodded. I'll try not to be. With that, he walked off into the darkness, the headlights of his car illuminating the gravel as he drove away. Carlton remained on the porch, heart full, mind brimming with possibilities. The next morning, he woke to a renewed sense of determination. He was no longer just trying to keep his head above water. He wanted to thrive and help others do the same. The day's chores felt lighter. Checking on the corn, calibrating the tractor, and going over finances now carried a sense of purpose he had rarely felt before. He began drafting a plan to improve the farm's irrigation, gathering quotes and designs for a more efficient system. He also set aside time to mentor a younger neighbor who was starting his own small plot. Demonstrations from the previous day had sparked a wave of interest in the region, and farmers kept calling, eager to learn how to implement the technology. Throughout the summer, the fields thrived. Occasional rainstorms provided enough moisture, and the tractor's precise planting had maximized every acre's yield potential. When harvest time arrived, Carlton got to work using the tractor's specialized attachments. He found himself moving through rows at a brisk, steady pace, collecting an astonishing volume of corn. His hands shook at times, from sheer excitement, from the possibility that all these bushels would translate into the income he needed to finally wipe the slate clean with the bank. When the final numbers came in, he was elated. The yield had shattered his previous records, thanks in no small part to Greg's gift. He sold most of the harvest at a favorable market price, then watched with relief as the funds in his account rose enough to not only pay the critical debts, but also set some aside for improvements. On a sunny afternoon, he walked into the local branch of the bank with a check that covered a large chunk of what he owed. The banker's eyes widened in surprise, and as they processed the payment, Carlton felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't entirely debt-free, but for the first time in years, he was on stable ground with a clear path forward. That autumn, he began the installation of a modern irrigation network, partial drip lines that conserved water while delivering it directly to the plant roots. He also tested new seed varieties that Greg's company recommended, picking those best suited for the region's climate. Ms. Wilcox regularly dropped by, beaming at how the once struggling farm had transformed into a hub of innovation. Even the battered old barn, once a symbol of decline, now housed a refurbished workshop where Carlton tinkered with new farming devices. As word of his success spread, more people reached out, hoping to replicate his results. Carlton found himself hosting smaller, informal events. Groups of neighboring farmers would gather in the barn to discuss strategies, share experiences, and watch demonstrations of the advanced tractor. Each meeting reminded Carlton of how far he had come. No longer was he the isolated farmer drowning in despair. He was a leader, an example of what perseverance, bolstered by timely aid, could achieve. When winter arrived again, snow blanketed the fields, but Carlton's heart was far from cold. He arranged for a holiday gathering, inviting Ms. Wilcox, a few of his employees, and some neighbors who had become like family during his hardships. They feasted on roasted vegetables from the garden, swapped stories around a cozy fire, and marveled at the sense of community that had formed. There was laughter, there was hope, and above all, there was gratitude. Carlton ended the evening by lifting a glass and proposing a toast, remembering the days when such a celebration felt impossible. Months rolled by, each bringing new developments. The farm continued to prosper, and Carlton further reduced his debt. He forged partnerships with local businesses that benefited from his robust supply of corn and other produce. Jody visited periodically with updates on Greg's company, inviting him to speak at regional conferences. He accepted one invitation, traveling out of state for the first time in years to share his experiences. Standing before an audience of fellow farmers, industry experts, and technology enthusiasts, he recounted the story of a scorching day, a broken car, and a single act of kindness that had catalyzed a profound transformation. He used no flowery language, just simple honesty, but the crowd was riveted. Afterward, many approached him, eager to replicate the synergy of compassion and innovation. Though the distance made it rare for him to see Greg in person, they kept sporadic contact through letters and the occasional phone call or email. On one such call, Greg mentioned that he might make it to the region again soon. Carlton brightened at the news, hoping to show Greg everything that had been accomplished. The thought of seeing his friend's reaction to the orchard, now in full bloom and producing apples, filled him with excitement. Another demonstration day was scheduled for the following spring, this one larger than the first. The company planned to showcase new models of machinery, high-tech seed coatings, and advanced weather monitoring systems. Carlton's farm was once again the chosen venue, and he threw himself into preparations, cleaning up the farmhouse, upgrading the barn's interior, and meticulously organizing the fields for easy viewing. As the date neared, invitations went out, and an impressive number of people registered to attend. It seemed that, in just a couple of years, his once dying property had become a beacon of possibility for an entire agricultural community. When the day arrived, the turnout surpassed all expectations. Rows of vehicles lined the main road. Tents sprang up across the property, each showcasing a different aspect of modern farming. People roamed from station to station, gathering pamphlets, asking questions, and networking. Carlton led multiple tours, now comfortably confident in his role as an unofficial spokesperson for how a small farm could embrace new technology without losing its heart. Sometime in the early afternoon, as he was explaining drone-based crop monitoring to a group of curious visitors, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning, he saw Greg standing there, a smile touching his lips. "I see the place is still thriving," Greg teased lightly, gesturing at the crowds. "How's the orchard?" Carlton's face lit up. Without a second thought, he greeted Greg with a friendly hug, ignoring a few surprised glances from onlookers. "Good to see you. Come on, let me show you." He led Greg along a path behind the barn, where rows of apple trees stood, branches heavy with fruit in various stages of ripening. The orchard had been revived through careful maintenance, and some of the same technology that had boosted the crops. The transformation was remarkable, and Greg's admiration was evident as he ran his fingers gently over a low-hanging apple. "It's beautiful," Greg said softly. "I remember seeing this land when it was parched and tired. You've worked wonders, Carlton." They strolled through the orchard, leaves rustling overhead. When they reached a small clearing, they paused, gazing across the farmland. Visitors and staff could be seen milling around the demonstration areas, an air of optimism and collaboration pulsing across the fields. Greg looked at Carlton, something thoughtful in his expression. "I'm proud of you," he said. "But I'm also proud of the way you've used this success to lift others up. That was always the hope, you know, to help one person who would then spread that help further. Seems like you're doing exactly that." Carlton felt a flush of warmth. "I remember how desperate I was. It's not something I ever want others to feel if it can be prevented. You gave me the tractor, but you also gave me a chance to believe in possibility again. And that's what I want to share with them." They returned to the crowds, where Greg fielded questions from some of the media present. Rather than dwell on his own role in the story, he diverted attention back to Carlton's dedication. He praised the resilience of small farmers, emphasizing that technology was a tool, but the true engine of success was the heart and determination of people like Carlton who refused to give up. Reporters hum on his words, scribbling notes about the synergy of old-fashioned grit and cutting-edge innovation. As the day wound down, they retreated to the farmhouse porch. Greg loosened his tie, letting out a contented sigh. "I'll probably be off again soon," he admitted. "These days, I'm traveling between continents, forging new partnerships, but I'm always just a call away. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate." Carlton nodded, feeling both gratitude and a pang of sadness at the transient nature of Greg's schedule. "Safe travels, then. And thank you again. I think about that morning sometimes, how different things might have been if I'd just waved you off or pretended not to see you. Scary to imagine, really." Greg met his gaze with unwavering sincerity. "Well, you didn't wave me off. You helped me, and that made all the difference. Now you're helping countless others by sharing your experience." He sipped a glass of water, eyes drifting toward the horizon. "When people talk about you in our company, they call you the heart and soul of the pilot program. Don't underestimate your impact. This farm, these demonstrations, your willingness to teach this is changing lives." The next morning, Greg departed early, leaving behind the faint sound of gravel crunching under his tires. Carlton watched him go, quietly reflecting on the path they'd traveled. The fields around him shimmered in the morning sun, no longer desolate but filled with promise. The brand-new tractor, which had once seemed like an impossible gift, now stood as a testament to how generosity can multiply when it meets fertile ground, both literal and metaphorical. Life carried on. Each passing season brought its own challenges, from unpredictable weather to market fluctuations. But with an upgraded irrigation system, a network of supportive colleagues, and the ongoing relationship with Greg's tech firm, Carlton faced those hurdles with steady resolve. He continued to experiment with new crop rotations, eventually adding a stretch of soybeans and a small patch of sunflowers. The orchard flourished, producing enough apples that he started selling cider to local stores. Even the barn, once a symbol of decaying fortunes, became a local landmark where monthly meetings were held, bridging gaps between traditional farmers and the forward-thinking approaches championed by Greg's Apena Company. Over time, he paid off the last of his debt, turning what had once been a ticking time bomb of foreclosure into a stable enterprise. The farmhouse received much-needed repairs, windows replaced with energy-efficient models, the porch reinforced and repainted. The transformation was so dramatic that passing travelers sometimes stopped just to stare or to ask if they could take photos of the orchard in full bloom. Ms. Wilcox joked that he ought to charge admission, but he simply laughed, remembering that the farm's resurrection was rooted in an act of kindness he could never put a price on. On certain evenings, while the sky was painted with the vibrant colors of sunset, Carlton would take a slow walk along the rows of corn, pausing to run a hand across the stalks or pluck a stray weed. In those moments, he often recalled the day Greg's car had broken down near the edge of the property. He remembered offering water, a sandwich, and a place to rest in a dusty barn. He remembered how Greg had quietly departed, only to return with a life-altering gift months later. That memory, for him, was the essence of hope. Two strangers crossing paths in adversity, each leaving the other with something priceless. As the years passed, they stayed in touch, exchanging holiday cards and sporadic updates. Greg's business expanded, while Carlton's farm turned into a shining example of how modern methods could revitalize even the most beleaguered operations. Whenever someone asked him for advice, Carlton always said the same thing: be open to the unexpected. Sometimes a small act can spark a chain reaction beyond anything you can imagine. In the hush of an early morning, before the roosters crowed, he would sometimes walk past the barn where Greg had slept, hearing echoes of that first conversation. The place where a dusty sedan had once sat baking in the sun was now just another patch of grass at the farm's periphery. But Carlton had planted a seed there, a small sapling that over the years grew into a sturdy oak. He never mentioned the tree to many people, but for him it symbolized the generosity that had taken root in his life. If he ever needed a reminder of how fortune could change overnight, he only had to glance at that oak, its branches spreading skyward as if reaching for endless possibilities. In time, the story of Carlton and Greg became something of a local legend, told at dinner tables and community gatherings. Some versions embellished the facts, painting Greg as an angelic figure descending from the heavens in a tractor. Others focused on how dire Carlton's circumstances had been, depicting him as a farmer on the brink of utter collapse. The truth was simpler. Two people had met under harsh conditions, each one giving what he could. One gave a helping hand and a place to sleep, the other returned with a gift that changed a life. For Carlton, that simplicity was the greatest lesson of all. You never know what shape gratitude and kindness might take when it's passed from one hand to another, multiplied by compassion, and circled back again. A few lines from the note Greg had left with the tractor still echoed in Carlton's thoughts whenever he fired up the engine. For the man who helped me when he had nothing to spare. Thank you. May this keep your farm alive. Those words encapsulated everything that had unfolded since, from the first time he heard the tractor roar to life, to the day he saw the orchard bursting with ripe fruit, to the crisp mornings when he prepared for Baxen. Community workshops. They were more than a message. They were a mission statement that guided him toward being a steward of generosity himself. And so the land, which once threatened to slip away into the hands of banks and creditors, remained in Carlton's care. Each season, he nurtured it with renewed vigor, investing in better seeds, forging partnerships, and embracing progress without abandoning tradition. He shared his knowledge openly, refusing to hoard the techniques that brought him back from the brink. As his orchard grew, he invited local children to pick apples and learn about sustainable farming. During the fall, he set up a small festival on his property, complete with hay rides and fresh cider, celebrating the bounty that was once a distant dream. In every corner of the farm, from the old chicken coop to the newly renovated barn, one could sense the influence of that single moment of hospitality when he had offered Greg a glass of water and a meal. Time has a way of smoothing over the rough edges of hardship. People in town began to forget how close Carlton came to losing it all, taking for granted that his farm was a success story. But Carlton never forgot. Every day he rose before sunrise, stepping out onto the porch to watch the sky lighten over the fields. He kept Greg's note pinned to a bulletin board in his kitchen, next to photos of the orchard in full bloom and a snapshot from the day they unveiled the new tractor. He lived in constant awareness that life's greatest blessings often arrive without fanfare, sometimes even hidden in trials. The memory of that battered sedan breaking down and the dust swirling around Greg's polished shoes remained etched in his mind. If you were to visit Carlton's farm years after the events began, you would find a thriving operation that marries cutting-edge technology with the healed wisdom of the land. You would see a farmer who's neither proud nor broken, but balanced, shaped by both adversity and kindness. And if you were lucky enough to catch a quiet moment, perhaps at dusk, when the tractor is parked neatly beside the barn, you might hear him humming softly, glancing toward the horizon. In his eyes, you'd catch a glimmer of something powerful: gratitude for how a lost traveler had once stumbled upon his property, turning a simple act of compassion into an unbreakable bond, forging a future that even the harshest drought couldn't destroy.